Chapter 4. The first principle. Thought is the only power which can produce tangible riches from the formless substance. The stuff from which all things are made is a substance which thinks, and the thought of form in this substance produces the form. Original substance moves according to its thoughts. Every form and process you see in nature is the visible expression of a thought in original substance. As the formless stuff thinks of a form, it takes that form. As it thinks of a motion, it makes that motion. That is the way all things were created. We live in a thought world, which is part of a thought universe. The thought of a moving universe extended throughout formless substance, and the thinking stuff moving according to that thought took the form of systems of planets and maintains that form. Thinking substance takes the form of its thought and moves according to the thought. Holding the idea of a circling system of suns and worlds, it takes the form of these bodies and moves them as it thinks. Thinking the form of a slow-growing oak tree, it moves accordingly and produces the tree. Though centuries may be required to do the work, in creating, the formless seems to move according to the lines of motion it has established. The thought of an oak tree does not cause the instant formation of a full-grown tree, but it does start in motion the forces which will produce the tree, along established lines of growth. Every thought of form held in thinking substance causes the creation of the form, but always, or at least generally, along the lines of growth and action already established. The thought of a house of a certain construction, if it were impressed upon formless substance, might not cause the instant formation of the house, but it would cause the turning of creative energies already working in trade and commerce into such channels as to result in the speedy building of the house. And if there were no existing channels through which the creative energy could work, then the house would be formed directly from primal substance, without waiting for the slow processes of the organic and inorganic world. No thought of form can be impressed upon original substance without causing the creation of the form. Man is a thinking center and can originate thought. All the forms that man fashions with his hands must first exist in his thought. He cannot shape a thing until he has thought that thing, and so far man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. He has applied manual labor to the world of forms, seeking to change or modify those already existing. He has never thought of trying to cause the creation of new forms by impressing the thoughts upon formless substance. When a man has a thought form, he takes material from the forms of nature and makes an image of the form which is in his mind. He has so far made little or no effort to cooperate with formless intelligence, to work with the Father, quote unquote. He has not dreamed that he can do what he sees the Father doing, quote unquote. Man reshapes and modifies existing forms by manual labor. He has given no attention to the question whether he may not produce things from formless substance by communicating his thoughts to it. We propose to prove that he may do so, to prove that any man or woman may do so, and to show how. As our first step, we must lay down three fundamental propositions. First, we assert that there is no one original formless stuff or substance from which all things are made. All the seemingly many elements are but different presentations of one element. All the many forms found in organic and inorganic nature are all but different shapes, made from the same stuff. And this stuff is thinking stuff. A thought held in it produces the form of the thought. Thought in thinking substance produces shapes. Man is a thinking center, capable of original thought. If man can communicate his thought to original thinking substance, he can cause the creation or formation of the thing he thinks about. To summarize this, there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. Man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. It may be asked if I can prove these statements, and without going into details, I answer that I can do so both by logic and experience. Reasoning back from the phenomena of form and thought, I come to one original thinking substance, and reasoning forward from this thinking substance, I come to man's power to cause the formation of the thing he thinks about. And by experiment, I find the reasoning true, and this is my strongest proof. If one man who reads this book gets rich by doing what he tells him to do, that is evidence in support of my claim. But if every man who does what he tells him to do to get rich, that is positive proof until someone goes through the process and fails. The theory is true until the process fails, and this process will not fail, for every man who does exactly what this book tells him to do will get rich. I have said that men get rich by doing things in a certain way, and in order to do so, man must become able to think in a certain way. A man's way of doing things is the direct result of the way he thinks about things. To do things in a way you want to do them, you will have to acquire the ability to think the way you want to think. This is the first step toward getting rich. To think what you want to think is to think truth, regardless of appearances. Every man has the natural and inherent power to think what he wants to think, but it requires far more effort to do so than it does to think the thoughts which are suggested by appearances. To think accordingly to appearance is easy. To think truth regardless of appearances is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work man is called upon to perform. There is no labor from which most people shrink as they do from that of sustained and consecutive thought. It is the hardest work in the world. This is especially true when truth is contrary to appearances. Every appearance in the visible world tends to produce a corresponding form in the mind which observes it, and this can only be prevented by holding the thought of the truth. To look upon the appearance of disease will produce the form of disease in your mind and ultimately in your body. Unless you hold the thought of the truth, which is that there is no disease, it is only an appearance and the reality is held. To look upon the appearances of poverty will produce corresponding forms in your own mind. Unless you hold to the truth that there is no poverty, there is only abundance. To think health when surrounded by the appearances of disease, or to think riches when in the midst of appearances of poverty, requires power. But he who acquires this power becomes a mastermind. He can conquer fate. He can have what he wants. This power can only be acquired by getting hold of the basic fact which is behind all appearances, and that fact is that there is one thinking substance from which and by which all things are made. Then we must grasp the truth that every thought held in this substance becomes a form, and that man can so impress his thoughts upon it as to cause them to take form and become visible things. When we realize this, we lose all doubt and fear, for we know that we can create what we want to create. We can get what we want to have and can become what we want to be. As a first step toward getting rich, you must believe the three fundamental statements given previously in this chapter, and in order to emphasize them, I repeat them here. There is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. Man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. You must lay aside all other concepts of the universe than this monistic one, and you must dwell upon this until it is fixed in your mind and has become your habitual thought. Read these creed statements over and over again. Fix every word upon your memory and meditate upon them until you firmly believe what they say. If a doubt comes to you, cast it aside as a sin. Do not listen to arguments against this idea. Do not go to the churches or lectures where a contrary concept of things is taught and preached. Do not read magazines or books which teach a different idea. If you get mixed up in your faith, all your efforts will be in vain. Do not ask why these things are true, nor speculate as to how they can be true. Simply take them on trust. The science of getting rich begins with the absolute acceptance of this faith. End of this chapter. Now, this is a fundamental teachings, not only in the vernacular and the curriculum of William D. Wattles, but also in the, how should I put it, law of attraction, law of manifestation, power of the mind, community at large. Why? Because it's pretty much the basic of all, and that's why this is called the first principle. James Allen said that we cannot have the same sustained train of thoughts, good or bad, without changing our circumstances and events, and even ourselves and others according to those thoughts. David Hawkins said that what we hold in mind tends to manifest. What we hold in mind. Yes, you can manifest when you have a fleeting thought. Let's say you hear a word and you happen to want to know the definition. 2 hours later, the next day, you stumble upon this word in the right context and boom, there you go, you understand this word. Or you're thinking about someone, a friend. You're about to reach for your phone and call this friend. This friend happens to call you first. That is more manifestation, and it can occur on a day-to-day basis. However, when it comes to larger things, larger goals, bigger goals, higher reach, so to speak, we tend to have more resistance because we have not sustained this train of thoughts, or at least we haven't sustained it long enough for it to impress our subconscious mind. Or we have done it for a sustained amount of time. However, we keep, as Joseph Murphy would say, digging up the seed because we have contrary negative thoughts. So if we have a certain sustained train of thoughts of being rich, of being with a specific person, but after a while, it could be after an hour, after 2 hours, after 2 days, after 3 days, after 4 days, after 4 months, after 4 years, we have another sustained train of thought, which is contrary to those positive affirmations and thoughts, then we are only digging up what we have impressed on the subconscious mind. That is why William D. Wattles said, and I'm glad he said this, because for anybody who is studying this, the mind, the cultivation of the mind, I like to call it the cultivation of the mind because the Buddha called it the cultivation of mind. And the cultivation of the mind is more of a general thing instead of a more detailed, specific, esoteric aspect of the mind, because you can cultivate the mind in so many different ways. But to cultivate in the mind in a way that we get what we want, what we aspire to be, what we want to have, is hard work. And for a lot of people who come to the law of attraction, they want it to be easy. And don't get me wrong, it is easy to a certain extent, in the sense that we do not need to put too much effort. On the contrary, if you were to put too much effort, you might manifest exactly the opposite of what you want. But now you're asking me, Sebastian, what are you talking about? You say it's hard work, but you say that we should not put too much effort. Yes, there is definitely a middle way. What I'm trying to say, where William D. Wattles said that it's laborious. Why is it laborious? Because no matter how much you work on any given task or endeavor in your life, in this physical world, nothing will be as hard, for one simple reason. It is impossible to work from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, unless you are in the gulag, unless you're a slave. And even then, it will not be sustainable because you will end up dying. That's pretty obvious. But obviously, this is an extreme example. But most of us, even the hardest working people, will not be able to sustain this amount of hard work for a long time. And even those who are known to work harder than anybody else are still a minority, and they don't even work as much as the work you need to do to sustain the thoughts, especially, as he said, to sustain the thoughts that are contrary to the appearances that you have around you. Which means that thinking the thoughts you want to think is already a hard task in and of itself. But thinking thoughts that are contrary to the appearances is even harder. That's why he calls it the truth. The truth is the thoughts you want to cultivate in yourself. If you want to be rich, if you want to be with a specific person. I don't want to seem and sound too corny and tacky when I say rich. And if you want to make a certain amount of money, if you want to succeed in a particular endeavor, in a particular business, if you want to be with this particular person, if you want to attract this particular type of friends, etc., etc., whatever the case may be, there will be a time when you don't have this, and there will be a time in between when you have it and when you don't have it, and when you start impressing your subconscious mind. But in the meanwhile, you need to sustain the thought of it regardless of the appearance. Because as he said, just because you think it right now doesn't mean it will appear instantaneously. It takes time. The time is out of our hands, which can make it a bit more difficult because we don't know about the time and we don't know about the how. So it's purely on faith. That's why he wants us to understand this, to fathom this to our core, to understand that this is what we need to believe, and we don't need to think something else about it, which means we need to have the faith that our thoughts create, that we are the gods of our own reality. The Buddha said the mind is the forerunner of all things. So that's why he talks about formless substance, thinking substance. It doesn't matter what it is. I think his vernacular is, I don't want to criticize him for his vernacular, but it's kind of the vernacular of his time, and maybe the one that he used with his audience and that his audience liked at that time. When we read this as our generation right now, 2021, right? When we read this, it's a bit like almost annoying, I would say, because like it sounds a bit contrived and a bit too complicated for what it is, because in reality it's pretty much the mind is the forerunner of all things, and you impress your subconscious mind, you sustain the thought, and you don't let any thought dig up what you have impressed on your subconscious mind, and he goes from one thing to another. And to be fair, what he said is in line with a lot of things that I have learned from Buddhism as well, so I'm not criticizing the essence of it. But I would say the second part of this chapter is more important. The first part is, yes, you want to understand that thinking creates that blah blah blah. The second part of the chapter emphasizes more on, yes, you need to understand this, but you also need to believe it. Because it's one thing not to believe in your manifestation. Let's say you want to be rich, you don't believe you can be rich. That's one thing. And that's what you need to work on as well. But it's another thing to not believe that you create with your thought, because that's a huge obstacle, which means that everything you want to manifest, because of that belief, you will not get it, because everything else stems from that belief that you do not create with your thought, or you have doubt about it, so you might have partial manifestation, partial results. But because you do not necessarily grasp to a certain level that you create with your thought, well, you need to reinforce this faith by manifesting smaller things, by keeping the faith regardless of what it takes. And that's something that I think not a lot of people place an emphasis on, because it's not as glamorous. We all want to manifest and visualize the riches, the material gains, the SPs, the cars, the mansions, the trips, etc., the lottery winning, etc., etc. But this is much less glamorous. Everything in this chapter is much less glamorous than what we want to hear, what we want to read. Because we need to ingrain the belief that our thoughts create. And we need, as he said, to cast as a sin anything that will go contrary or against this belief, this faith. And I agree 100%, because if you don't have a dominant belief in that your thoughts create, you will have multiple and continuous obstacles along the path. I will go even further. If your dominant thought is the disbelief in this faith, as William D. Wattles will call it, you might not even want to go through the process. You might not want to affirm, you might not want to visualize. Why? Because you don't believe to begin with. If you are F1 racer, for example, and you don't believe you can win, right, you might not even want to train hard, you might not even want to sign a new contract, you might want to retire. I don't know why I chose this example, but I was thinking about Lewis Hamilton and this example came to my mind. But anyway, you understand what I'm trying to say. Sorry for the bad analogy, but I'm trying my best. Okay, so the most important thing is obviously to understand this and to believe it is true, and to keep the faith that our thoughts create. And there are multiple affirmations you can use, such as, I am the God of my reality. If this one seems too far-fetched and exaggerated and too crazy, you can say the simple one, I know that my thoughts create. My thoughts create. I'm the master of my reality. The mind is the forerunner of all things. All things stems from the mind, which William D. Wallace will talk about as the formless substance, thinking substance, etc. It doesn't matter. The vernacular doesn't matter. The essence of what I'm trying to say, or what he's trying to say, is the most important thing. So once you believe, once you have this affirmation, and once you have sustained this faith for a while, you can also, at the same time or a bit later, sustain a train of thoughts about what you want. But you have to understand, it is liberating to understand that it will not be easy. Why? Because if you go, it sounds fun. Like when we first stumble upon the law of attraction, we all want to believe that, oh, it's so easy, it's effortless, etc. And after a while, it becomes effortless, but you still need the discipline. And a discipline that does not stop. You have to understand, unless you're sleeping or you're in a high level absorptive state of meditation, you will always have to have this level of awareness that you are not letting in thoughts that are contrary and negative towards your manifestation. So understand this. It is laborious, as I say. But laborious not because we need to force it, but laborious because we need to sustain it and persevere all the time, every day. And especially at the beginning, because at the beginning you will have many contrary thoughts. So you might need to do it so often that it might exhaust you, drain you, but it becomes easier. And after a while, you just won't have those thoughts anymore. You need to sustain it, but it will be much easier. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, it is laborious, it is the hardest work, but it becomes better, it becomes easier. That's the truth of it. Because after a while, the mind won't just produce those thoughts anymore, because you have let go of the attachment to certain negative thoughts and you have replaced them with positive thoughts. And the mind works very well with repetition. So once you repeat it and when you impress the subconscious mind a certain way, it will just give you more of what you have impressed it on. And it's your job to stand guard in front of your mind and not let contradictory negative thoughts enter it. And that is where you need to place your discipline and your focus. So that's it for now. I think I wanted to do a shorter audio video, but I went a bit too far. But it was important nonetheless. Thank you so much for listening. I am Sebastian, your manifestation mindset meditation coach. If you want more information about me, please check the description box below. And if you want more of this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you very soon.